Hey guys, here we are solving some more quadratics. Now, the important thing to remember with these is that there is not necessarily just one answer that will satisfy the equation, okay? There may be two numbers that will make the equation true. All right, the first thing you need to do is you need to make sure that this equation, or all of your equations you're trying to solve, are in factorized form, okay? Factorising is very important. Now, the reason factorising is very important is because solving these equations is based on this scenario. So if I have something, I'm just going to draw a box. If I have something and I times it by 0, then I get nothing. Okay, anything times 0 gives me 0. So we need to put these into the form where it's something times something equals 0. Once you've got something times something equals 0, then you know that one of your things has to be equal to 0. Because if I have 2 times 1, okay, that's never going to equal 0. But if I have something times 0, then it doesn't matter what the other thing is. As long as there's one thing equal to 0, then the whole thing is equal to 0. Because if you times anything by 0, you get nothing. Okay, hopefully this will make a bit more sense once we start to factorize and solve these. The first thing I want you to do is to factorize this, because I want it to be in factorized form so that I've just got something times something, okay? That's the form that I want it in. All right, what do these two have in common? X squared and 5x. Well, they've both got an x in them. So let's bring the x out the front and let's write it in this form, where we have brackets and the other side's just got equal to 0. Okay, so my question to you, x times what gives me x squared? Well, x times x gives me x squared. Now, x times what gives me 5x? X times a positive 5. Okay, so here what you can see I've done is I've changed my x squared plus 5x into x outside of x plus 5. They're exactly the same thing. They mean the same thing. It's just that this bottom one I've now factorized. All right, so bring the x out the front, leaves me with x plus 5 equals 0. All right, now I have exactly what I wanted. I've got x times all of this inside is equal to 0. Remember I said if you want something to equal 0, you have to times it by 0. That means that either this x out the front is equal to 0, or everything in the brackets is equal to 0. Okay, it could be one or the other. We don't know, but we know that one of them has to be equal to 0. So in this case, you're going to have two possible answers, okay, because there's two things happening here. So either, here's our answer, either this x out the front is equal to 0. So either x equals 0, or everything inside the bracket here equals 0. Now, that means that x plus 5 equals 0. Okay, if x plus 5 equals 0, what does this x have to be so that when I add 5 to it, I get 0? Well, that's a simple equation. You can solve that by going minus 5, gets rid of my 5s, x equals 0, take away 5 is minus 5. So my two answers here, x equals 0 or x equals minus 5. Okay, now when you get used to doing these, what you'll see is, because this is x plus 5, you can probably just look at it and go, well, if something plus 5 equals 0, then the something just has to be the same number, but with the opposite sign. So you'll see that minus 5 plus 5 gives me 0. Okay, so there's my two answers, x equals 0 or x equals minus 5. You can check your solution like you always can by putting both of these numbers back into our original equation. Now watch this. If I take minus 5 and I put it back here where x is, I get minus 5 squared. Now minus 5 times minus 5 gives me 25, plus 5 times x is, remember, minus 5, so plus 5 times minus 5. Now 5 times minus 5 is minus 25. So essentially what I have is 25, and this here is all equal to minus 25. So 25 plus minus 25, well, that's just equal to 0. Okay, so the minus 5 works. Now the other option is to put the 0 back in here. You get 0 squared is 0, plus 5 lots of 0, which is also 0, and that equals 0. Okay, so you can see that both of those numbers satisfy the equation. All right, let's go across to this one here. We've got x squared, take away 2x equals 0. Again, we need to factorise. So let's bring out the common factor of x. X comes out the front. Okay, x times what gives me x squared? And that's going to be an x. X times what gives me minus 2x? And that's going to be minus 2. And we've got it all equal to 0. Okay, so you can see here I've just factorised. Now, if this whole thing is equal to 0, that means either this x has to equal 0 or everything in the bracket has to equal 0, because one of these things has to equal 0. Okay, because when I times them together, I have to get 0. So either this x out the front is equal to 0, or everything in here is equal to 0. So x take away 2 is equal to 0. Now, if x take away 2 equals 0, simple equation there you can solve. Add 2, gets rid of my 2's, and you'll see that x is equal to 0 plus 2, which is 2. So there's my two answers, x equals 0 or x equals 2. Again, you'll see that x equals 2 is the same number as what's already in the brackets, but just here with the opposite sign. This is a minus 2, this is a positive 2. Because a positive 2, take away 2, has to leave me with nothing. Okay? Okay, if they are not in this nicely factorised form for you, what we're going to do with these ones is the same thing. We're going to factorise them. How do we factorise this equation, or this algebraic expression here highlighted in yellow? How do we factorise that? So x squared plus 5x plus 6, we want to factorise that. Now you should remember that to factorise this, we need to find two numbers that multiply to make the 6 on the end and add to make that number there in the middle. So I want two numbers that times to make 6 and add to make 5. Let's write out all the numbers that multiply to make 6. You've got 1 and 6, and you've got 3 and 2. Okay, so which one of these pairs, they both multiply to make 6, but which one of these pairs adds to make 5? Well, 1 plus 6 is 7, 3 plus 2 is 5, so this is the pair of numbers that we want, 3 plus 2. Okay, let's factorise that using our numbers we just found, x plus 3 and x plus 2, and that's all equal to 0. So again, you'll see here that we have two things times together to make 0, which means either this first bracket has to equal 0 or the second bracket has to equal 0, because when I times something by 0, I get 0. Okay, so one of these brackets has to equal 0. So these are my options. Either x plus 3 equals 0, which would mean I would take 3 off both sides to get rid of my 3, and I'm left with x equals minus 3. Or the other option is, over here, these brackets, x plus 2 equals 0. All right, which means, again, let's take off 2, and that leaves me with x equals minus 2. Okay, so here's my two answers. X equals minus 3 or x equals minus 2. All right. Again, you don't have to do this middle line here that I wrote out. I'm happy for you just to jump straight to this highlighted answer, okay, because you can see that if x plus 3 equals 0, then x has to be minus 3, and if x plus 2 equals 0, then x has to be minus 2. All right, let's see if we can jump straight to this answer with our next two questions. Okay, factorising. X squared minus 7x plus 10 equals 0. So I want two numbers that times to make 10 and add to make minus 7. All right, what times to make 10? Well, we've got 2 and 5, and we've got 1 and 10. Now, given that this is a positive 10 and this is a negative, the numbers have to add to make a negative number. But because they have to because they have to times to make a positive number, both of our numbers actually have to be negative, because two negatives times together will make this positive 10. So I actually need minus 2 and minus 5, or minus 1 and minus 10. They're my two options. Which one of them will add to make which one of them will add to make this minus 7? Well, 2 minus 2 plus minus 5 equals minus 7. There it is right there. If I add these two together, I'll get minus 11, which is not what I want. Okay, so here's my two numbers, minus 2, minus 5. Let's factorize now. Okay, so my two numbers were x take away 2 and x take away 5, and that equals 0. If x minus 2 equals 0, then x has to equal 2, or if x minus 5 equals 0, then x has to equal 5. And there's our two answers. Lovely. All right, next one. We've got x squared plus 2x minus 48 equals 0. I need two numbers that times to make minus 48 and add to make a positive 2. All right, this time we've got a negative. So they times to make a negative, which means one has to be a plus and one has to be a minus. They have to add to make 2. All right, all the numbers that times to make 48. Well, let's just have a look at these. You've got 1 and 48, 2 and 24, 3 and 16, 4 and 12, 6 and 8. Okay, these are all the pairs that can just make a normal positive 48. Bear in mind, one of them has to be plus and one of them has to be minus. So what that essentially does is doubles everything, because instead of just 1 and 48, that means I have minus 1 and positive 48, or positive 1 and minus 48, and I can do that for every pair. Now, if you do that for every pair, you should find, this is the pair I want, 6 and 8. Let's try 6 and 8. You've got minus 6 or positive 8, or positive 6 and minus 8. Let's get rid of everything else, because I promise you it's one of these numbers. Okay, so minus 6 and 8, or positive 6 and minus 8. Now, both of these will multiply to make minus 48, which is what we want. The question is, which ones add to make positive 2? Well, minus 6 plus positive 8 gives me positive 2, and positive 6 plus minus 8 gives me minus 2. Okay, so obviously these are my numbers here I want. Minus 6 and minus 6 and positive 8. So let's get rid of everything else. They're the numbers I want. Minus 6, positive 8. Let's write these out. So we've got x take away 6, x plus 8, and that equals 0. All right, if x minus 6 equals 0, then x has to equal 6. And if x minus 8 equals 0, then x has to equal minus 8. And there are my two answers. Last one. Okay, over here, we have x squared take away 25. Question is, where's our x term in the middle? So normally you'd have x squared plus something x minus 25 equals 0. Okay, what we actually have here in the middle, there's no x term, which means we've actually got 0 x's. Okay, so in this case, I want two numbers that times to make minus 25, but they actually add to nothing, which is why there's not actually an x term here in the middle. So what two numbers times to make minus 25 and add to make nothing? Well, 25 can be made by 1 times 25 or 5 times 5. Given that I need to multiply them to make a negative, I need one of each. So you'll find that I need a minus 5 and a positive 5, and when I multiply them together, I get minus 25. Now that will give me the right answer here that I need at the end, minus 25. If I add them, do I get 0? Well, minus 5 plus 5, yes, that does in fact equal 0, so these are the numbers that I want. So let's factorize this. I've got x plus 5 and x take away 5 equals 0. Okay, so if x plus 5 equals 0, again, we want the opposite sign to what's currently there. That means that x has to equal minus 5, because minus 5 plus 5 equals 0. Over here, we can also have or x equals positive 5. All right, and there's my two answers. All right, you guys can go ahead and do me your questions. Have fun.